Welcome back to Mom in Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. On our episode today, I'm talking with Adam Angel, who is going to talk to us about fathers' mental health. And that is a really important conversation always, and during June as we're celebrating Father's Day. And very specifically, June 19th this year is International Fathers' Mental Health Day. Postpartum Support International will be sharing some conversations about International Fathers Mental Health Day on their Facebook and Instagram pages on Monday, June 19th, including important conversations about Black fathers' mental health. Today with Adam, we are talking about the challenges of paternal mental health and what that looks like for fathers in general, and what are some of the origins of paternal mental health challenges. I'm also really excited about this conversation because Adam's going to share with us a little bit more about his work using the neuroaffective relational model. And some of what that is doing work on the inner child, which we don't often hear about in conversation when we're talking about fathers. There are some really specific ways that, fathers and men in general have been conditioned to look past their feelings and sort of pretend that everything's okay, or keep a stiff upper lip, or whatever it is in Western culture, but a lot of cultures about men and fathers needing to be and behave a certain way. It's not as often that we take a softer look at why fathers might feel the need to have that stiff upper lip type of emotional response. Adam also talks about supporting the father in the co parenting relationship. And there are so many gems in our discussion today. Adam is a licensed clinical social worker with 15 years of experience working with youth, adults, and families. His specializations include paternal mental health and developmental trauma. He currently facilitates both peer support and depth oriented therapy groups for fathers at various stages. He specializes in supporting fathers that have suffered perinatal loss of stillbirth and in early infancy. Adam's specialization in developmental trauma is supported by his master's level training in the neuroaffective relational model, also known as NARM. Really excited for you guys to learn more about this model of therapy, and really for us to be having more conversations about the emotional complexity of the men and fathers in our lives, as opposed to just assuming that they're not having an experience related to parenting, to fatherhood, and to being men in a society that tell them that they're not supposed to be emotional. This is a very necessary conversation, and I hope you really enjoy this conversation with Adam. Welcome, Adam. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me here today.
I'm really glad to hear from you and for you to be sharing with the folks who are listening about paternal mental health and some of the things that, frankly, that I think a lot of people don't know about, or maybe even make assumptions about how dads and fathers and the paternal mental health journey, what it's like. So yeah, if you can start with some kind of basics, fundamentals of what paternal mental health is and how you support new dads.
Sure. So paternal mental health is the large view of the bird's eye view of all challenges related to mental health for fathers. And a lot of the focus in the literature has been around perinatal work, so in the first year. And then there's sort of even prenatal work too, and that's also big. And a lot of the biggest work has been done in the UK and Australia, but it's getting bigger and bigger in the US.
Yeah.
And I've been doing my own work through supporting fathers right before the birth of their child, as well as the first year doing support groups for men in like a 10-week style group. And then that kind of led into group therapy work too with men with children of all ages. And so those are the main areas I'm doing work.
Oh, that's awesome. Unfortunately, as you know very well, societally, dads and fathers it's like they're viewed as kind of this other part of a baby coming. And I know that you and other people who are doing your work and us in perinatal mental health are trying to change that. But I think Like, what kind of challenge does that bring to the fathers that you meet with, just in general, but also even finding the support that you give?
Yes, this is a big part of it. I mean, I think what the experience of many men is that they're sort of not really a part of the doctor's appointments. And this
Hmm.
isn't because they're not showing up, it's because it's not being addressed, or people are not being addressed by their healthcare providers as a duo, as a, if that's the case for them. And I think there's a way that the literature that's there for them, for parents, the opportunities and resources, they're not geared towards anyone besides the mother. And I think that's really key
Hmm.
in sort of feeling welcomed into that. And so the prenatal, antenatal classes is a big part of it, and having someone, especially someone who has had a similar experience, being able to facilitate that is really important for feeling welcome and being there. There's more to say about that, of course.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Right. We're skimming the surface in a way, because there's so much to know and to understand. And, to your point, like the father's experience is also emotionally complex. It's not just the birthing person.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting, I think, how well, I'm interested, I should say, in just even how people come to find you, and find specific support. Did people tell you about how they find you?
Yeah, and I have like a funny story. So when I was starting this, and so just as the pandemic had started, I had my second about a week after we all went home. It was pretty
Mm,
crazy. So that was partly what pushed me to do this work. And
yeah.
once I left my job and started private practice. I put out a lot of things for fathers, and I think I got like 1,000 responses from moms and from practitioners, but not many from men.
Mm,
And so I really had to revamp some of my language, but then I put also made some partnerships with a local organization, which is the Breastfeeding Center of Greater Washington.
mm-hmm,
And so just a place where so many classes that for moms, and they'd been looking for something for fathers, but hadn't yet put something together. And so when I reached out to them, that was a big help. And then, of course,
yeah, for sure.
Instagram was helpful. And eventually, because I'm a therapist, other therapists have, sort of been doing presentations, et cetera. And so dads hear about me this way. But I
Mm-hmm,
think to your point, if I'm being honest, even though I have a number of groups and people think that's a lot, it's a drop in the bucket for what I could be doing or what we
mm,
could be doing
right.
as a community and with other male practitioners, et cetera, because there's such a need.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, one of the ways to do it is, again, through primary care uh, physicians or hospitals. But so I'm working on it, but it's
Right.
a
Yeah.
work in progress.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think, or what are you seeing anyways? And what are people telling you about the kind of how or why they might be having mental health challenges during this perinatal period?
The the how and why that is basically men are coming. Well, when they come to support groups, they may not say that. I want to offer that they're coming and saying that they want to have, some men will say that they want education, some specific resources, but many are saying I just want a group that feels like where I can actually talk to
Mm,
other men and talk to their experience. And I one of the men described this as um, you know having a place to dump out rather than dump in, because he felt like every time he was talking about it with his partner, there was just more friction because I wasn't
right.
welcome to share experiences. So the why is, I think, really complex here, is that there's the reality that we all know that, the framework has already been laid by so many great um, folks that have done this work with women, which is obviously the stress of the moment. This has been one of the biggest life changes in our experience as people.
Right.
And you have that, you're holding that, and then you have, of course, this lack of sleep. You have the impact on your partner, which we all know, I think many people know, is impact on your partner, and then that impacts your relationship, and then the men and the partner will impacted that way because the relationship with the partner has deteriorated. They may feel they're being neglected. They may feel that the partner has changed, their life has changed in terms, probably the biggest thing is loss of their current life and what they knew, what their expectation versus reality has now shown them. And I don't know, I'm leaving off many, but I think there's a lot of also this pressure on ourselves, which we'll get into, that we all put on ourselves that may not match really what's needed. I think
Mm,
we have all these things that we put on ourselves and how we relate to ourselves. And so one of the things that we talk about most is, so at the underlying piece of this is that, am I a good father? Was the
mm,
question that a lot of men will, they're like, and usually what they're doing is they're shaming themselves
yeah.
at this moment. I'm actually not a good father if you get to the source of it. But a lot of what we're doing here is one, obviously normalizing that in the group. And then
Mm.
if we do deeper work in like a therapy, and again, there's other ways to be with that.
Do you find that, um, well, I guess just as in any group or in therapy environment, people get more comfortable as time goes on, talking about kind of, you know, what's like really, really going on, how they're being impacted by this journey. Um, what are the things that are, in the groups that fathers are sharing with each other that that maybe the average person wouldn't think that men would be sharing about?
Yeah, I'm gonna put myself in the average person thing too. I'm telling myself that in the support groups, this is how I framed it earlier on, that this would be a bit lighter, that I made it very semi-structured, which some groups really, really take to, and others are more interested in being open and processing.
Mm,
And so I think a lot of factors, we have like 8 to 10 guys, and sometimes there's some a little bit less, and that kind of changes the dynamics. But what will, and I got pushed to do this by one guy, and I appreciate that he did that, is really processing, even from the very first session, what happened in the birth. For a lot of men, what shows up is PTSD
mm,
from being in that process with their partner.
yep.
And that is probably the biggest shocker for anyone that doesn't know, hasn't had that experience. Like, you didn't even do anything. But if we understand that seeing someone that you most love go through extreme pain, and then you hold also that many men will see themselves as being the person that's supposed to protect their partner.
Mm,
So even and many times this is the case, a quote unquote not challenging birth, or sort of typical birth, will bring about a really challenging experience for the partner. And so, like, a lot of fathers will come in, and I mean, it's shocked me on day
mm,
one with men that they don't know. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that I'm doing these groups virtually.
mhm,
So some of them are most of them are local to the Washington D.C. area, but some of them are also coming from outside the area. And they may even start to cry in that moment, or share really deep and challenging feelings. And of course the group is very supportive of them, and it's also true that men don't experience this, and they have a great experience in those moments, but they're able to be together and share that.
mhm,
I think probably what's also one of the biggest things they share is, like, what I go through as one of the sessions topics is um, postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. And we'll go through, like, what your partner might be going through, and then it goes into what you might be going through.
mhm.
And I try to start that there, because if I do the other way around, it never gets to the partner.
Right.
So what happens is, I don't know, a number of times men have been like, wait, but this is happening to me too. And I'm like, I know, we're getting there. Just give me like 10 more minutes. We're just gonna process some of this. So I think, it's really a lot of sharing around that. And I think also what's been coming up and great to share and see that other men don't understand what other men are going through is, like, process of intrusive thoughts has been a big
Mm,
thing people have been
mm,
sharing recently with me in particular. And it's just like, this is, and I had to, this was a beautiful conversation that I had just a couple of days ago, where you had one of the folks in the group who felt really close to sort of how his wife is feeling and her intrusive thoughts, and then hearing two other men have their own, and then saying like how is it, like he's having a challenging time experiencing it through his wife, and then these two men are having it themselves, and they were just almost sharing to this point of like understanding and compassion
That's
for
lovely.
everyone here. And what I was describing as like, this is an extreme moment of pressure on yourself,
Yeah.
that we bring our old stuff, all of our own stuff, which we'll get um, into a conversation under a really stressful situation in a society that's not supportive of either parent,
Mm.
uh, ultimately as parents. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's true. Ugh. Uh, yeah, it feels like an uphill battle sometimes. Like, why aren't we more supportive? Why aren't we more understanding and compassionate? And um, I mean, there are a lot of reasons, as you're saying, for this, but I don't know, yeah, and maybe this is your experience too, being on sort of this side of hearing so many stories. Um, it's just so frustrating and so angering that we can't support parents better as a
Yeah,
society. Mhm.
yeah, and I've taken to. I'm not done with my thinking around this, and I wished I was for this conversation with you. Um, but just thinking about what is it when I put it to the group sometimes, like what can you do that you wouldn't normally do communally for each other and
Mhm.
for others in your locale, that really like emphasizes community, because it's not happening for us necessarily on a policy level.
Right.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't push, just that's there's the and.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I'm in the process of thinking through that too with you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. Yeah, it's a huge, huge um, societal problem, and it just has generational impacts.
Absolutely.
And well, I know that some of I'm interested to hear about some of the work, and I don't know if you're doing this in groups as well, but the individual work using the neuroaffective relational model. And can you tell people a little bit about what that is and then what that looks like in therapy sessions?
Yeah, so we call it for short NARM because it's a mouthful, as you just said. But I think what it's getting at is basically a process for that's non-pathologizing, that's relational, that in many ways could look like or similar to internal family systems, and that's more well known on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, especially in California, NARM is somewhat known, and it's in Europe and et cetera. So what NARM is doing is really looking at you and really from a subjectivity lens. So thinking about the person and the therapist as both having the subjective experience and really being with this person in a way that's extremely curious, very agency oriented, and is looking at their experience as a whole person. And
Mm,
so when someone comes in, the big question that we ask them is, sort of what is it that's your deepest desire for yourself? So we're asked, of course, like what is it? How do you want to use your time? But then once we understand what they want to talk about, what is it that you most want for yourself? And this is a big question that I think really pushed me to grow, because what we're getting at is really this internal state or something similar that they're seeking in themselves, and it gets us away from so the behavioral models, and it's more oriented towards how they're relating to themselves and how they would like to relate to themselves, and
mm,
then what that might feel like. And I think it, it's definitely something that's been effective with this population, and a lot of times what survival strategies we've used from our childhood to get us to this place
mm,
really are not helping us in the way that they're showing up. And so um, what will happen is, men might say like, they may be having a very acute issues, but what they really would like for themselves is to feel ultimately like a good father, feel some esteem about themselves,
Mm.
or have some calm when they're with their child. And, so there's a couple of different examples of what they might want. And then we'll be with what might be getting in the way of that. And so as we're doing that, this extreme level of agency and extreme level, I don't know if extreme is not the right word, um, extreme level of compassion, holding both of those at the same time,
Mm.
because we recognize that ultimately what a child has done, and this is the theoretical framework, is they've looked at themselves uh, as, I'm sorry, when they in their family of origin, they'll be in a situation where they're wanting their own autonomy, they want safety and security, but when that what they want is coming at a cost because their parent is unable um, to give them that, their environment doesn't
Mm.
afford them, they
Right.
adjust themselves. And so they say to themselves, you know what? I got to change myself because I can't challenge my family. That's too dangerous to challenge their family. I mean, I know I could. we
Sure.
Most people can speak to that feeling of saying, okay, like this is going to get me yelled at or worse, and in my family, and the worst thing for a child to feel is that they might be separated from their family of origin. So they adjust themselves, and when the number one way they seem to adjust themselves is to shame themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we notice this a lot in how our dads will shame themselves, and what shows up instead might be efforting, like to be the best father, to do more, or it's to maybe to disconnect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
separate themselves and so on and so forth. So those are some examples of what we do. And so when dads do this in the group, for example, in the therapy groups, we'll discuss what's happening for them in this experience is obviously going to be felt in multiple people in the group and really resonate with each other because they're going through many of the same things.
Right.
Obviously, how it shows up exactly is different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I mean, this is so important. This is both healing things from our past, but also trying to be the, for in this case, like being the father that you want to be. And what you were saying before about how some things, get in the way of that is, I think, really, really powerful. It's speaking specifically to the shame, because, shame just makes you feel like it's you're the problem, I'm the problem. Um, you know, it sits with me to overcome this thing that I have no idea why I feel the way I feel, and then do better from something that I don't even know why it feels bad. It's really complex. So having guidance from, therapists who's doing the work that you're doing, um, is really powerful and really, really important. Because inherently in what you're doing is it's a non-shaming approach. It's like let's see why things are the way they are.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the big ones that I'm sure you hear over and over is like the baby's crying and I got angry at the baby. Why did I get angry at the baby? There's something
Mm-hmm.
wrong with me, or and even sometimes that isn't what happens. Sometimes it's like just I'm angry at the baby and like the acting out on, so they either the shaming in or the anger out. But we're noticing that this is a really, if we're looking at it from a compassionate standpoint, we're looking at it from this person, this parent is in a very vulnerable state in this moment, lack
Mm-hmm.
of sleep, etc., plus major life change. And
Yeah.
for a lot of men in particular who have not gotten to the level of emotional development as some of their partners, this is really, they have all the loss that is like immediate, right? They've lost maybe their immediate relationships at this moment, what they normally do to support themselves, whether they're working out, et cetera. But then, and so you have that grief, but then there's the grief that's old that and the emotions that come up from just being in a vulnerable uh, emotional situation by being with this baby that needs from you.
Uh-huh.
And maybe what is happening potentially here is that what was not available to them in their own lives is being triggered here as they're with this child.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really a big part of why I think we have such extreme reactions to this
Mm-hmm.
moment. Personally, something that I felt absolutely I
Mm-hmm.
went through.
Oh, this is, as you're talking through this, I primarily meet with women, um, and perinatal women, and I hear from their perspective, what's happening with their partners, with their husbands, and this comes up quite a lot. That and the mom, let's say, who I'm meeting with, is sees her husband being angry, and then her husband doesn't know why he's angry, or he might be um, verbally kind of lashing out a bit at her, sometimes the kids. I mean, I'm not hearing every detail of everyone's experience, but um, the mom that I'm meeting with might so desperately want her partner, her husband, to get help too. Or she might not be able to see that he's suffering at all, and just like, why is he being such a jerk?
Yeah.
And because of like what you're saying, that because of it's so complex, that how would the husband be able to explain to his wife why he feels the way he feels, if it's never been modeled to him that even that it's okay to have feelings?
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing, and I'll use the word that you just used, is the role model gap, right? If we
Mm-hmm.
haven't had this role model of a father who's been able to be with their emotions in this way,
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, it's much more challenging to do so for yourself. And it's really, even though we talk about it as just like in the family system, but it's larger than that, right? This is, my colleague says it really well, that there's, fatherhood groups are really masculinity groups. They're
Mm-hmm.
really, this is really what we're talking about here, is that men are impacted by the larger culture as well. And so this is all part of our developmental trauma, because
Mm-hmm.
that was my experience. That's many men's experience. But even the men that have had that experience, it's still, because I'm holding that I know some men that still go through this and actually putting pressure that may quote unquote look like how women deal with it. And again, I'm quoting here
Uh-huh,
the
yeah. Mm-hmm.
thing of, but like in the reality is that we can't pigeonhole like us as having one experience, and a lot of the men that show up in therapy do have a different experience because they're the ones that show up to therapy,
Right.
right? And so they may be efforting just as many women do, and saying and sort of putting too much pressure. And that's the swing that I know you've seen in
Mm-hmm.
the work, in this kind of parenting model that maybe goes too far, where we're taking on full responsibility for everything
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like putting this much pressure on ourselves. And this is just another form of developmental trauma here showing up. And so we really balancing out both, sort of, it's not just two, but the reality of like whatever it is that they've experienced and how they really would like to feel in that moment instead, because we really don't have to hold on to these things, and we want to make it and allow it to be whatever it is. And it's, and again, in the context that you mentioned, this is a bigger problem than that. As I like to say, like we're not supposed to parent in twos. That's just ridiculous. I mean, we were never supposed to do that, and
Mm-hmm.
we've lost so much. One of my teachers, he talks about how one of the biggest challenges is the generational challenge, which is that all the wisdom of the generations that we came from has been disconnected, and it's its own trauma. And that trauma is impacting us and shows up here. It shows up in even the parents that have been connected to us. Still, they may not have had, and we don't have a lineage that provides necessarily the same amount of support and practices that we really need in supporting a child, not just to hold them and help us get through those sleepless nights,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also like, what, where is that wisdom? It's really challenging. We're recreating this, and it's all of that at once. So
Um, oh, right. So in some sense, and again, being maybe overly general, but I'm thinking of the father kind of at the center of that example is that they're walking into this with blinders on. I mean, like, or in some ways, maybe even emotionally, um, quote unquote, blind to, um, for one, not potentially not even not being able to understand themselves emotionally, their partner emotionally, what's going on with their baby. That, babies, for instance, babies just cry. Um, it could very well be interpreted as also many things. I mean, things that I hear from moms could be the same things that dads feel like this baby doesn't like me. I can't wait till they're 5 and I can actually like communicate with them. I hate this part. You know, there's so many iterations of this, and how men could feel that we societally have to really hold that it's complex. It's not just one thing.
Absolutely. I mean, and what you're describing basically is a subjectification of men and
Mm,
fathers.
mm,
And I think this has been the challenge is that, essentially what men will do, and if I say that, it's an objectification of it. It's like, each person is uniquely individual and it's extremely complex. And so is the experience of obviously the other partner. And of course, as you mentioned, the baby. And all of this is really this intersubjectivity of how do we see each other, all of us in this human space. And then that this whole space, just very hard. And to do so in small dyads, it's really, really challenging, right? Because we know how it's already taxing.
oh
Right?
yeah, right, for
So,
sure. Right, and then COVID brought this whole other level of
that's right. So
that's that messed everything up. So speaking to this, dyad and the relationship of the family system, how are you supporting fathers for them to, I guess, feel feel and understand their value in the relationship as well?
yeah, that's helpful. I to reflect on. I think I tend to what tends to come up is that I'll share a little bit in the topics and like for example in the support groups, and we'll discuss what might be going on with in terms of the relationship, and then what tends to come up that I think is helpful is we'll talk about the mental load that women are many times carrying, and I'll ask so where you are, how you feeling about how much you're carrying, and what ends up coming around is usually is around if the partner is breastfeeding, is like how they may feel disconnected from this part of the support, and thinking about like how do you support the partner, whether that be one of the dad's great thought of always coming towards like sort of the second part of the breastfeeding, and sitting with the partner and just connecting with the partner, and thinking about how to be more in connection, and being a part of that process. There's a lot of discussion around having conversations about taking what really makes sense for them so they can sleep, so that they can take turns in terms of feeding, so they can be part of the process, but also holding, sort of understanding how their partner may be operating from a different view with different impacts and different stressors, and how that really might be playing out in their relationship. And so thinking about that, and so there's some of that compassion for them. And then I share a little bit about Fair Play Life, which I'm very fond of, and have connected with folks there, and talking about how do you really have these explicit conversations, regular conversations, whether that be the weekly meetings or like setting up the cards to decide um, who's covering what, and so on forth. But I think when we get into it a little deeper, one of the big things is also that is in Fair Play Life, but sort of also in general, you may be familiar with, is just thinking about um, what is my standard of care. The minimum standard of care is how it's called in Fair Play. And it's basically like, can we have a conversation about is this good enough? And really what it's underneath that is, am I good enough when I do it this way?
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're saying to me implicitly is that I'm not good enough. And the counter to that, which may be perfectly valid, is like, actually, like this is not enough standard for me. The, he needs to be fed on this schedule, or else we're going to have X happen. And that's a fair conversation, but it needs to be had explicitly and it needs to be had passionately, and recognizing again, we're holding all the things that are unfair generally. Right. So if I haven't slept, like, I'm going to be mad at anything. Like,
At everything. Yeah.
responsibility, right?
Right.
So we're holding all of that and just kind of just encouraging the conversations. And a lot of our work in therapy is to integrate the emotions that are really there, the primary emotions. And so, if people are frustrated and have a real healthy protest to say, which is like, hey, like, I'm here too. I miss you, or I
Mm-hmm.
miss having like, I haven't worked out in 3 months, and like we need to make space for us too. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, you're not seeing the baby. I'm the only one that cares for the baby. Like, no, I really care for the baby, but I'm caring for myself. I'm caring for you. I'm caring for our relationship. I always talk about the three relationships, which you may have heard before. It's just like the relationship between you and your baby, you and your partner, and then you and yourself and your, sort of outside relationships. And how important it is to hold all three. And the strain is one partner tends to focus on the baby and the other one, which tends to be the mom. And so just really holding all of those as equal, and thinking about how together you guys can create maybe more support externally to support the family system.
Mm-hmm.
Just not easy.
Oh, no,
Um,
right. Yeah. And it takes some time for
yeah, I
sure.
mean, like, well, yeah, sure, of course. I mean, it's taken us a lot of time. And, my 6-year-old, 3-year-old, I'm like, we're finally figured it out. So,
Right, right, right.
but I think like when I bring up like gatekeeping, it's like this term. It's like, okay, this person's only saying I can do it right this way.
Mm.
You know, it, there's a lot of emotion there, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, she says this, it's like, but there's some validity to like, hey, like you need to do your side, and there's also truth of like, I want to have conversations about how we can parent differently
Yeah,
and together, and we can respect each other's styles as long as it meets this standard.
sure.
So I think that's probably one of the bigger things.
Yeah. Can you just quickly go back and explain a little bit about what fair play life is for
Yeah,
people
sure.
who don't
Yeah,
know?
I kind of talked about it. That
Hmm.
explanation. Yeah, Fair Play Life is essentially a card system. It was originally a book, and then they made some cards that um, support co-parents in figuring out. Actually, it's before it doesn't even require to be a parent. Supports the relationship and balancing out what's fair in who's carrying what in the relationship. And you don't even have to have the same amount of cards, but you have to be okay with what the reality is and if it's agreed upon. Because obviously each card and who cares about each thing, it's unique to the people. But I think,
Mm.
yeah, it's a wonderful system to. I think it's
Cool.
fairplay.org or .com. I think.
Okay, cool. Yep, that's a tool that people can use, can check out.
Mhm.
Um, so in maybe in your groups or in the therapy, what are some, maybe even just a couple, one or two kind of quickish things that that dads and fathers can do that helps them out in this process?
The quickest thing that I can think of is what we kind of talked about, which is like first and foremost having conversations set up regularly, and
Mm,
obviously we trying to do these things prior to having kids, but we're in the middle of it, having this space because to make clear what you need and what's needed for the family to get through, and to remember, of course, that this will get better 1 week at a time, 1 day at a time, and so
mm-hmm,
that what's available this week, you might be able to get a little more next time.
mm-hmm,
um, what else is, I think, kind of self-evident here is like, the fact that I'm pushing and doing groups is like, you need to have a community that understands and you can, be with and
yeah,
share the stuff because it's already hard on, yes, it is hard on your partner, yes, you should share your challenges, but also like it needs to be more than just your partner, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think unfortunately, some of the relationships that men have can be limited, and depending on the person, I mean, it's definitely more so than women. And so that creating that network is really important, and deepening those conversations. Because a lot of times men will go to those relationships to forget and be away from the parenting, which makes a lot of sense. And can you get another, is there another relationship where you can deepen in and say, actually, this is what's really happening for
Yes.
me?
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you, Adam, for all of this. I mean, it's just there's so many things that could each be their own, deep dive that you talked about today. And what I think is so important, and you highlighted throughout this, is um, using compassion as a way to support yourself. It's hard to do. It sounds like it would be easy, but it's hard to do. Um, but also for everybody else to have compassion for fathers too, and not just sort of, as you said, make them this sick other
Yeah,
thing.
objectifying. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, this is incredibly important work, and I'm really grateful that you came on. And everybody can go find you and what you're doing at dadswithwisdom.com.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to mention that we have a International Father's Mental Health Day. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, so that's coming up, and it's landing on Juneteenth. So because it's landing on Juneteenth, but also just because it's needed, we're going to be hosting, and some of, I think, one of your former guests, Dr. Sheehan, will be there, I believe,
Mm.
and amongst others, who will just be speaking to Black fathers' experiences and the wisdom that they can share for us, and really, telling us where we're at 2023 and where we can hope to be in the future. So this is all being done by Postpartum Support International. I have the hopefully have the privilege to co-facilitate uh, this conversation that day. So it'll be nice.
Awesome. So that's Monday, June 19th. And where can people go to listen in and to see what's going on?
Yeah, I think that might be forthcoming. It'll probably be in the show notes, but
Okay, great.
I'm
Great.
not sure yet. Just yet, we're working on, like, with the live, etc. So,
Right. So right, there are quite a few providers and advocates doing work around International Fathers Mental Health Day. Like you said before at the top, like both in Europe
yep,
and more and more here. So you guys can go to postpartum.net to find out where you can be a part of this conversation and see what's going on for International Fathers Mental Health Day. Thank you, Adam, for being with us. I really appreciate it.
really appreciate you. Thank you.
Please learn more about Adam's work on his website, dadswithwisdom.com, which is also his Instagram handle. We just have to be changing the narrative about how fathers and men are viewed and really start knowing them to be the complex, emotional, feeling people that they really are. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time.